Well, welcome to the Dream Labs. Dr. Contrast live here, gang. I just thought I'd take a quick minute and greetings to all, and hope everything's going well for you. And then I'd start today's stream with just a bit of a review here. This has really been an interesting project. We started this whole process last year about the G12 series, and I think we had some pretty good progress being made, but over the holidays, as I said last Thursday's stream, I just began to notice that there were some things in this form that were really not quite there yet. And yeah, I really think some of the graphics, for example, from the front end system looks pretty good. We've gotten a much smoother almost relationship back to the original G12 that we're looking at to kind of maintain some of that character. We did have some of that, then we dropped off the pods and so forth, and kind of slimmed down the overall shape and widened it a bit to make it more of a GTR series, unlike the one that was done by Origin. And again, I'm not criticizing that. It just didn't look like a GT machine. It was just a paint scheme change on an over-terrain vehicle, which was very, very beautiful, simple elegance. But it really didn't. Hey, hello there, Doug. How are you? Good to have you on board here, Chief. Just want to get started with a bit of a review here, Doug, on this G12 series. Help me, Doctor, in what sense? Very interesting, Doug. So going back to the history of this thing, there was some great progress made. I think we really tackled some interesting things about what the character of the original Origin was. But as we went through it, it just kept refining it and refining it and refining it. And then finally, the end of the final renderings that we did last year, somewhere October, November, we're in this category here, where all of a sudden we got a nice front-end graphics. It was very simple, very lean, almost had a almost like a monocoque floating cockpit series in the center here. Interesting, but the real bothersome thing to me was just this very simple, plain body side, and then the intrusion or the addition of that intake over the top of the induction intake over the top of the body surface on the side panels. Yes, it works, but it didn't look like it was mean enough, or it didn't look like it had enough character to it. And it was a very clumsy surface to work out, because as this surface goes over the top, how do we get from that upper piece to that corner area was a bit of a problem. So I think based on that, that was part of the introduction piece we did last Thursday on the stream. This is where we started. Then from that front end study, I went into a rear three-quarter series of doing something like this. For example, what does it look like from the tail section? Then something really odd began to take place here. Notice in this sketch here, all of a sudden we've got the same overall form, but this kind of sneaks in underneath this overlap of the shelf on the rear three-quarter. Now that had some interesting intrigue to it, but how do we resolve that to get back into the canopy and over the top of the rear three-quarter and into the intake system and exhaust and so forth? So it was an interesting take on this series, but it still didn't resolve that rear three-quarter area that we saw or we discussed in that first portion, that first sketch we did, or the final CANSON rendering we did of the G12 front three-quarter study. So based on that, we did that one study, then I went back and did the same thing, and went back to this and said, okay, what if we did this, for example, that same hip, that same process coming through, then that same hip over the top of that, but getting much more voluptuous or much more character referenced in the rear three-quarter areas with the hydrogen cells for power and so forth, and then it's very drop over it. But notice how that surface really, to make this work. Hey, hi Chip, how are you? Good to have you on board there, Doctor. To make this surface work, you really have to kick that out quite a bit, and I don't know if that's really what we're after, a lot of plan view change. So again, this was a very interesting cosmetic sketch, but did it really solve the problem of modifying that rear three-quarter surface to get that intake to work with the rest of the form, and yet not compromise the simplicity and the overall intent of what we're after from a design point of view. So that was that, and then we went from that. Now last week, based on that sketch, we went back in and did some three-quarter front studies. Again, we're back to some really fast pencil sketches here. Overall character was still there in the front. We didn't maintain, or we didn't take too much of that away. Then we started to roll this surface back over the top again, and to make it kind of work back into that surface or that plan form that comes over the top of the front wheels and goes rearward. So that we kind of kept, and then we actually opened this up just a little bit in the rear three-quarter, and then dropped that surface over the top. So now that made more sense, and it kind of cleaned things up, but it still wasn't quite the resolve. It added some really complication back in here, and is that what we want to really deal with? Then the sketch below was another fast study in terms of same front-end character, just keeping it all together, but really raising that tower in the rear three-quarter area to get that intake to work, which resolved it, but it just didn't look, it looked like it was out of character. It was more of an attempt to make a statement in terms of intake as opposed to really being synergetic with the whole process of the vehicle we're after, by keeping it very clean, simple, very low profile, extremely wide, and has a lot of guttural character to it. So that was the first batch we did in terms of sketches. Then I went to the second set, going around and said, all right, what if we kept that same overall character? This front three-quarters started to take on some interest here. Now it's starting to work. Now, to get this to work, what happens here is this. that slants across that rear three-quarter area, which really becomes a bit of a difficulty when you put together the process of keeping the simple statement of the forms we've already generated. Not bad through here. I mean, it just makes more sense, put more weight in the pant back here to protect the rear wheels. That was interesting in terms of putting that together. But notice something else we did in this one too. It started to kind of shift some things here. In addition to getting a little bit more of a resolve in that rear three-quarter area, we started to take a look at what this guy does, and we pushed the whole upper forward. Look how much further forward this is to that. I mean, look at that upper here, how this upper rolls right back into the intake, and how this moves a lot further forward and pushes that canopy or the survival cell much further forward. It's going to give it more of a lean look in the elevation or the profile we start to work with. Once that was resolved, I said, okay, what if we did this? Again, looked at that rear three-quarter study, but something still disturbing about that overall character here. To get that thing to read in that view was extremely, a little bit forbearing, because it started to take, I like the idea of being very fork-like in the back and taking that out of there and sculpting the rear section to give us more latitude here for downforce, and I like maybe a spoiler added or whatever we might need. But again, that complication, and it was really not quite the resolve of it, because it's a lot of shift in the plan view to make that work. No, notice how that section had to change from being flush to a bevel, and taking that bevel underneath and creating a real shadow drop underneath that surface. Now that's a lot of change in surface, and I don't know if we want to deal with that at this stage of the game. So based on that, went back and finalized last Thursday's stream with a little thumbnail sketch, a really rapid, quick study. Getting more into this. All of a sudden we got a little more romantic with this thing, and I mean romantic in the sense it was less rigid. Still had some of the same sheer character to it in the body sides and the overall cockpit and the like. But now we had something going on with this little drop line, and again, making this thing start to read. I mean, that's not too much of a change. It has a little bit of a cantilever on the outset. It just steps out away from the surface a touch. But it also had some interesting look to it, because it kind of fell in place with keeping it simple, resolving that cell at an intake piece, but again, was it the right character for this overall shape we're trying to deal with? So today's stream is really going to dedicate ourselves to try and find a resolve, again, in that rear three-quarter. Everything else I'm really pleased with, and I hope you feel the same way. If you have any opinion or a point of reference to make, or a conversation about these studies, feel free to dive in here. You are the design team in this case, and I'd like to be able to work with you in terms of putting together some of the concept and then finalizing it to get into some final renderings and a 3D model, and 3D printed model rather. So from that study, we did a little bit of a side view gesture on getting into a speed form study, and I think it's interesting to bring that up at this stage of the conversation, because one of the things we want to develop here in-house at Formations or Dr. Contrast is a very simple series of, all right, we're going to get a final design down, we're going to brand this thing as our own product. It's no longer going to be a G12. We've got some licensing work to deal with, and rename it, do some really interesting 11x17 full color print work, and then move into what I refer to as a character speed form of this thing, so we can get that kind of squared away in a 3D printed format, and then begin to move some color into it and so forth, and just take advantage of a full marketing cycle on our own little brand identity here. So this was the beginning of doing a little empathic study of getting a speed form down, which we'll probably start doing a little bit more of maybe on Thursday's stream and maybe in the next Tuesdays. I'm going to start developing a series here of just this G12, because we resolved it last year, but we left it alone a little bit, but I still think there's some unfinished tied ends we have to really kind of resolve to put the whole thing into process and begin to look at this from the point of view of a really good solid product line. And then perhaps out of this, what kind of family of shapes can we deal with this? Can we develop a series of sedans and coupes? Can we go into a vehicle architectural piece that really tells a story about what this new brand is going to become? So all that to say, that's where we ended last Thursday with that stream in terms of putting together a little thumbnail sketch. So from that, I thought, you know what, after we ended that stream on Thursday, I went back in and said, boy, you know, we really have to do a little more investigating here. So I switched over to some CANSON and did this, a little front three-quarter and an elevation study. Now notice, there's some things happening here that I think I want to take some time to explain before we start to illustrate. Notice what's beginning to happen now. The profile is different. We've really lowered the overall height of the cab itself. I mean, the survival area has now been really dropped and lowered, but the characters remain the same. Now we've really floated the wheels out a little bit further. We've added that same downforce front dihedral to make that much more functional. But at the same time, notice what happened here. All of a sudden, to resolve this whole rear quarter area, thought came to me about isolating the canopy. make it a separate survival model. In other words, float this whole area. Notice back in the rear that comes over the top, drops back in, and then in this quarter area, the rear flank. So notice, look at the elevation, same thing. Basic overall characters, notice that sway line comes in, drops over the top, begins to split a little bit, but gives us a little bit more room to develop that intake. But notice, look what happens to the canopy. We moved it all forward, and then put this little sleeve in here, this little drop form, this little dihedral over the top, and then brought it right back down to the normal surface. It takes you back into the intake and the exhaust area, and so forth, in the power system. So looked like a little bit more of a sensible approach to getting a resolve in this thing. And let's just kind of move the source so the chat doesn't get in there. How's that? Is that better, game? So that's where we are in terms of, but from that point, I've said, you know what? Maybe it's taking this a little bit further. How do we resolve this? Is it up in this quarter area? Or what do we do with this rear quarter area here in terms of making it really functional? So I went from that into, let's do this. I took from that into this study here. And then again, another 3/4 area. Kind of a variation on theme here. Let's kind of put this together here for a second. What this does, it's looking, yeah, what do you think, Chip? Looking much better, you think? I think there's something about this, I don't know how you feel about this, but there's something magical about doing that whole shift in the canopy or the cockpit area, moving it all forward. Now, I still would like to lower that a little bit, obviously, but it's looking a lot stronger, I think, as far as being a much more GTR-related machine and not so rigid and so pure in a sense that it doesn't look like it's a machine. So all that to say that, yeah, I think we're making some progress in that series of studies there, Chip, no doubt. So I went from that into another rear 3/4. But again, notice what really began to really strike us here. Again, interesting. It can't be really more forward, can it? Yeah, we can. We can push it probably another. Let's go back to that a bit for a bit here. We can probably push this whole area. What I'm referring to, Chip, is this: taking this whole section, just shifting it forward about another foot, which really dives up. We'll still pick up that same nose cap here, but we can dive that off a little bit and lower that just a bit more. So the whole thing looks like it's about probably overall height, when it's all said and done, and scale about 38 inches. A typical IMSA GT machine, for example, an LMP prototype, roughly is about 185 overall length, roughly about 75 inches to 76 inches in width, and about 40 to 42 inches in height. So that gives us some latitude here, for example, to really take advantage of this canopy being really full forward, and I'm coming back in and doing some really interesting things with the overall impact of getting this body resolved squared away, and at the same time resolving that. I'd love to see that float. I mean, there'd be a bunch more of an isolated canopy. See, Doug's got a question. I really like the explanation of your process. Yeah, thanks very much, Doug. I think it's vital that we had a good thing going here, but I just didn't think it was really quite there yet. So to answer your question again, Chip, yeah, it can go a lot. It can go a lot forward and a little bit lower as well. Now, not much, but we can cheat it just a bit to make it much more, to make a statement. In other words, it's a very separate GT machine, and we've got some character to flavor it here. So let's go back to this sketch. Notice again, came back to that same. Now, notice we've resolved that catwalk up on top here, which kind of blends right back in to the rear area. Notice what happens here. Now, this is a good view where that canopy starts to cantilever, floats over the top, cuts back in, and meets that normal surface right down in here. And it comes back into this tail section here. This we're going to need some resolve on. I think it's kind of interesting. It's starting to take on some real character. Now, what we also did is this. The original variation on this theme was much stiffer. I want to go back and hide. This line here was much stiffer, which kind of stopped the flow of the machine. It wasn't as aggressive. So we changed the character of that vertical to much more lean in this thing, and then you'll find in a minute, this really starts to really slim down the shape and put a little more speed to it. It also gives a really good explanation of getting that canopy forward. And again, notice, this is a forced view where that intake looks, where it reside. And I'm still not convinced if that's the right way to place it. If we follow this surface through and let it kind of walk back into this tail form here, nice, and keep it simple, keep that flush. That might be kind of a nice approach to look at, and then take this intake into the body side here. So that motivated a series of sketches. I'm going to isolate this one in a minute. I'm going to use this guy in a second here to do some design work here. That motivated me to go back in and say, all right, let's take a look at this thing here. What happens? Notice it really gets forced when you start to look at that rear 3/4 canopy piece here, or the rear 3/4 intake. Notice the step out here is really, really dangerous. I mean, it changes the overall character. So I'm really not happy with the fact that, yeah, the speed line is better, but the offset is just not in character with it. And it really shows in this view here. Now, this could be a nice box section for maybe a variation 2 down the line, where we add a little more impact. This would be the floating canopy here, for example. And notice how the shadow tells you it's sitting up this normal surface. Then it comes up and it really breaks out. And in the front 3/4, this thing really has a big, huge plan view change. So that's one approach to it. Well, that's okay, but it's still not quite there yet. So I started moving again, went back to elevation. And this is what I'm getting at here, Chip. Look at this. Look at the difference in the stance of this upper as you move it all forward just a bit and lower it just a bit more. Just a touch more. Now it's got some real aggression to it. Now I think what's interesting also is this first family of shapes was taking advantage of the surfaces. Notice where the intake is. Now we've got it on the body side, which makes a lot more sense in terms of monitoring the overall form that we started with, but still making the surfaces cleaner and making some real modifications in the upper here. And again, this whole capsule area, to me, when it's all said and done, will read as if it's floating inside the armature between the two sponsons in the wheels. We'll get into that maybe hopefully tomorrow and maybe on Thursday and doing some plan view studies. Once we get this thing resolved, we'll start looking at some really good hard lines, explanations about what these views look like in all four views. But I think there was something happening here that started to look really a lot more sense in terms of what do we do with this now. It started to really look like, this begins to fit. There's a lot of rhythm now in the lines. Notice everything's chasing themselves. There's a lot of pattern being involved here. The front 3/4 looks a lot stronger, I think, in terms of keeping that vacuole on the body side. Maybe a little bit more interest in it, but we can add that too as we go here. Is mean. Yeah, the inside makes. Yeah, you know what, Chip? I think you're right. The side intake makes a lot more sense because, again, going back to this again, what it proves out is that this sketch is as fluid as it might look, does not begin to function well because that's a really cheated view to get that intake to work. And when you do that, you know you've got a problem with some surface generation around it to kind of resolve it. So really not quite happy with that at all, but I think we're starting to move together now, put together some really good, interesting surfaces here based on this side intake piece. The elevation looks good, a little bit forced back to the rear. You have to kind of refine some things. Now, we went from that study into another series of sketches here to get that to kind of, now this is starting to make some sense. Look how much lower this thing is now, Chip. 3/4 view is mean. Yeah, and again, the rear 3/4 rear is neat. Now look, we're starting to clean things up back here. Notice how that surface comes along, dives underneath there, and appears again to make this little widow's peak in the rear section really function well. So I think this starts to take on some real character. And again, the intake here, much more aggressive, and it starts to fall in line with some of the pattern and the rhythm of the lines we've been dealing with here. So I think it's really got an interesting concept to it here. Now, it might be too plain, but we can add a little bit of embellishments around that, but I think we're getting closer to a really good resolve. So I'm going to stop here for a moment. And those of you who are kind enough to join us here, what do you think, gang? Are we making some real progress here? Is it making more sense, or are we still forcing our hand here? Remember, today's stream is to take advantage of what we did last Thursday. Go in back and reevaluate, revisit this thing, and really begin to tune in to some of the sophistication we need to have this thing become a real separate brand. So let me stop here for a moment and give you a minute to respond here. Hey, thanks, Chip. Makes a lot of sense. In what sense? What do you think it's, why is it much stronger to you in a sense, Chip? Your input is going to be very helpful here. And while you're putting that together, I still think this whole upper canopy, I'm going to bevel this back. I'm going to really lean that in so it becomes much minimum. This whole tumble is going to get a lot more severe. So we'll really kind of fair that in so it looks extremely wicked in the front 3/4, but at the same time maintain the character of what we overall trying to achieve here. So what do you think, gang? Is this making sense? It is such an interesting journey because when you look at these things we're dealing with here, yeah, you can lay down a sketch and you put together a character or personality, but if it doesn't fit the paradigm or the benchmark you're working toward, it forces things. And I don't want to get into a situation where we start to force these things. I want to make it really pure in terms of why this thing begins to make a lot of sense and why it had to make a statement at the same time too. So let me just move on here. So there's and once that was complete, I thought, oh, why don't we do this? We went the other way. Now look what happens. Now we're adding some tear lines in this thing. Now, really, it's a little bit more contemporary. It's a lot monolithic than the previous, but it just looks cooler. Yeah, I think so too, Chip. It doesn't look so bland. The other one was okay, but it had a bland. It's like, you know, it's like kissing your sister-in-law. It just didn't taste right. So I don't know. It was there, but again, notice how this starts to tell a story. And I'm not happy with the overall content yet. But I think it looks a lot more aggressive. Notice we're really starting to play this. This hip comes through, rolls through, and it gives us this butterfly tail section on this thing, which I think is really interesting. At the same time, why not take advantage of doing a real good tear line and give it some interest? Look at some of the current LMP cars. Yeah, they're pretty flush, but there's some interesting things taking place on the intakes on the body side, especially Toyotas and Bentleys, for example. The new Bentley has that same kind of a look to it. So and again, look what happens in the elevation. Really kind of slick. This is what I'm getting at. Check how much lower that is. and it doesn't appear to be a violation. If you put cockpit, occupant, which we'll do in a couple of sessions, it's still a lot of foot space, a lot of really good interior space to work with here. So it just the overall gesture is getting. So notice again, this one is really cantilevers back. Let me just rotate this for a minute here. And this upper comes in, rotates, slices back, comes right back in again, and picks up that landing platform in the rear 3/4. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it's starting to look like a piece of poetry. We're starting to put the pieces together, and the ensemble is working. In other words, when I was looking at this, I remember years ago, Homer Lagasse used to tell a story about personality and about sophistication. And he said, why in the world would you go out there and buy a $1,000 suit made of pure silk, beautifully done in Italian thread and so forth, then go out to Kmart and get a plaid shirt to go with it? Doesn't make sense. And that's what we're after here. We've got a really good, tremendous piece of tailored suit work here. Now we got to find the right appointments to go with it. I'll never forget that analogy from Homer because it's so true. Now, if you've got something really sophisticated, man, keep it that way, but at the same time, don't try to oversell it. And that's what and again, here we are. This was one of the last 3 or 3/4 studies. Let's kind of push that aside here. And then this was the last piece I did. Again, variation on theme here, and really stepping this thing up with this little tear graphic up on this elevation. And this front 3/4, where man, we got to push this. This has got to come forward a little bit further. But the proportions, this line all of a sudden starts to fall in place with the upper. It comes over the top, waterfalls, comes out and steps out a little bit, but a little bit of an offset there. And then literally, look what happens in the elevation. Now it's starting to take on some real character. So I think we're really close to something here that's going to make some really interesting input as far as development of the sketch is concerned. So let's see, I like that cantilever winglet makes the place for suitcase. Not a bad idea. That's pretty cool. Not bad at all, Chip. Thank you. So let me stop again. Before I do any I'm going to take off on this variation here. I think there's some really good input in terms of maybe it's not as bold as what we're showing in this guy up on top, but maybe it's not as simple as this. And maybe that's the character wrapper. There's something about that that really kind of makes a commentary that really, I think, kind of sings a little bit. It just has so much more guts to it, and it makes much more sense. We could step this out a little bit in the plan view very subtly and certainly make it work. So let me stop here for a second and give you a chance to kind of absorb what we're talking about here and then give me some input on, again, direction, go or no go. What do you think, gang? Making common sense and making some real progress and keeping, again, remember the whole key, the key to this G12 service, this GTR, is sophisticated power. Now, it's not going to be pretty, but again, sophisticated. Everything makes sense. Everything we've done here has a character or personality behind it that really is going to matter. Anybody at all? What do you think, Doug? Chip? Fire away. Go for you, Chip. All right. So once we get that established here, if we've got a good go on this thing, let's go back to a rear 3/4. And that's where the problem to me, that's where the area really rests. I'll go back to this guy for a minute, and I'm going to take some of the liberties here and just do a little. I've never done this before, but I think we've got some pretty good resolve with the sketch itself. I'm going to just use this as an underlay and tune into what we might have to deal with here, and maybe in the same view. I'll put a little elevation down below here. Let's start with what we do know. We do know this. We do have a stance here in terms of getting the ground line down. Let me just see if I can start sketching here. It's the ground line. We're going to set. That's going to set the tone for us. There's a direction. Now we've got the front end. Get the wheel in place. Let's get that guy down. Let's just loosely put this in place. Let's get the rear wheel in place. Now we're all set. Let's get the axle set. That's where my center line is. And again, I'm going to drive this back. There's my center line there. Let's get those speed lines in place. Let's put the character down first. There's base. Come up to this body side piece here, and then slide that right back into that whole front end area. Let's slide that through. Let's slide that through, and then get that character established. There's something magical about that rhythm right there. I think we need to keep that. That's really interesting. We're doing some speed. Yeah, we're going to do some speed. Absolutely. Now let's simplify this whole upper. Let's take this line and dive it in. It's still going to be good. Notice we cantilever that back a little bit. Let's get that upper front quarter line and tear that into the wheels. Let's get that front draft in here. That's good. Let's get that to line. Let's slide that in. So far, so good. Now, let's take this line right through. This is where the key is going to be, right here. This line is going to have to come up, pick up the hip, and then drop right back into this. That cleans that up so much better. This line is going to dive and disappear. It's going to come back up and pick up a little bit of that. And then all of a sudden, we're going to have to come back in and pick this up. Let's do this. That's going to come back in up here. Then it's going to come back in and drop. It's going to come back in through here, pick up this, And there's the basic gesture we're after right there. Look at that. Now let's kind of transfer this over to the other side. There's my center line. Let's run that through. Now that hip is going to come up and do the same thing. Up and then drop right back in. So most of the elements right there. I mean, it's starting to come together nicely. Most of the elements are there. Now let's go back in and really kind of push this guy forward. Let's find out where this canopy is now. Let's drop this in. I'm going to really lower this guy. Drop it right down. Go a little lower. Raise it up. Pick up that termination point right there. Run that right back in again. Now, take that section and really roll it over. That section is going to come in here now. That's going to come back. That's going to come back. Create this. That's going to drop in and pick up that same section right there. Center line. Right back underneath the canopy itself. If I draw through that, there's my center line break is right about there. Now, let's get this wing to work. This is now going to come back in. There's that surface coming through. There's that surface coming through. There's the reverse right here. Let's get that break in here. To there. And to there. Center line. Now let's get this down even just a bit more. I'm going to cheat the daylights out of that whole upper. And notice the bevel there, really severe. Now that's going to come back in. At some point we'll break it maybe right about there and pick up that little bit of that hip. Let me stop there just for a second. What do you think, gang? Overall character coming together? There's some real graphic changes here that I think are going to make a huge difference. So let's get this line, let's draw this line through, get its connection, drop it underneath. Now let's do something else. Let's come back in there. Let's save this for just a second. Let's say we've got this coming through and it's going to drop in. That does that, and then drive that through. And it's going to come back in and pick up a little bit of that character right there. So there's the rear 3/4. All of a sudden, really starting to make sense, is it not? So let's go back to one of these studies here. Let's take a look at this guy, for example. If we keep that very, very, very simplified rear 3/4 study to get that intake to work, this is the guy I want to deal with right here. This has got some character to it. What if we took that baseline right there and came up off of that, drove it back, and then drove it right back into the shape? Let's drive that in. Let's bring it back. Let's reverse it and pick up some of that line right there. Now let's go back and pick up this lower piece, for example. This now comes off and picks up this. Now that section chain is going to come across, section, run across, up, down, outboard just a bit, and then back underneath the normal surface. Now notice what happens here. We're going to take that surface and slide it back. And then pick up that same angle here and pick it up right there. Whoa! Now again, this has a little bit of a tail to it, so it does that. Slim that up just a bit more. Take that highlight in. Take that section across the board. Run that uphill. Drop it into the form. Take this back. Run that through. Section. Butterfly. Butterfly. Notice where they're falling in place here. Now the intake. Let's get that ram chute underneath here, that down force canard on the underside side of the machine there. Now let's stop there just for a moment. Overall personality, what do you think, gang? Too much, too little? Interesting. I know you probably just, let's see if we can get this thing to read here just a bit. Let's kind of slap this down just a bit more. Let's take this over the top section. Now let's just drive this forward. Take this line back. Let's make this little lamping system buried back in the upper portion, or like a lighting brake light system back in through here. Now we've got this big shelf to deal with. It's kind of nice to kind of come back. Let's get those sections to read in here. Rolls up, comes in, rolls over, drops in. Well, let's get the underbody in place. Part of the G12 suspension system. Put a shadow in this thing. Start to settle it just a bit. Now let's change the pace here. Let's drop this in the center line. Let's make a big radical change here. Let's get this guy to really thrust out of here. Pardon me for losing the page here. There we are. We'll come back down the center line, cut this back in. Why not keep it as simple as this? Bevel it, bevel it, bevel it, and bevel it. Keep it nice and simple. There's the intake piece. There's the bevel there. And that dives right back into this normal here. Just got to get this guy to, pardon me for moving the pad around. Look at how simple that becomes. Instead of getting a lot of complication back in through here, for example, that doesn't need it, keep it nice and simple. Maybe this whole thing is all exhaust. So let's do this. Now let's take this surface and start to refine it. Run it through. Lose it. Run that surface through. round shadow in this thing. Pardon my silence here, gang. I was just concentrating on getting this guy kind of put together here as best we can in a very short period of time. Just a really loose, quick, and dirty sketch study about surface definition and how it begins to influence the overall forms that we're dealing with here today. So it's kind of neat. There's a little canard space that comes over the top of this guy, and the little dive line comes up. I still think, pardon me, here as I move along here, more elongated. I mean, yeah, let's see. We got. I'm sorry, a couple of questions here. Let's go for me. We're doing some speed. I'll take 2. Just got back. We've gotten more pointy bits. Yeah, more pointy bits. Elongated. Yeah, much more elongated. That might not be the good solid surface to deal with here. But let me grab an eraser. Sorry, guys. I'll just grab something. We'll get rid of some of the smudges on this piece, and just keep building on this thing. So my overall intent is, what do you think? I mean, are we making more progress in terms of getting some really good solid definition together with this G12? I mean, this whole idea of pushing that cab forward and dropping that piece in, to me, makes a huge amount of sense. So let's go back and just add a little bit more tone to this thing. We can see where the offsets are. There's just a slight shadow drop in that little area here. Kind of takes it across. And this is that movable flap we're looking at here. That speed, that changes pace. Location here. Much more simplified. Now we could add a dihedral underneath there, which we might want to do in some future reference points. I start to define this thing a little bit further. A little bit of a bit here. It's going to come back and do this. Some cooling streaks back into this. And just see what it does. And I'm reversing it here. Up, back in again. Fueling port, if we need it. Canopy. Diving in, picking up that front canard. And again, that comes down and picks up this shoe. Then we've got that little offset, that little tail there. There it is, right there. There's 1 and there's 2. Again, really quick study here, folks. So forgive me for the rapidity here. I just want to make sure we get a really good feel for what this guy is doing. Part of the carryover GT suspension structure over the top. And again, a little shadow drop just to kind of settle this thing down. I'm going to stop right there and see what you guys, what do you think, gang? Closer? Meaner? What do you think? Do I see more heights on the rear side? Yeah, much more heights. You know, you're going to see a lot more of this thing just kind of blistering up here, much like this elevation does right here, Chip. What's going to happen is that whole sway line is going to come up and really rise and drop, and which really pulls the canopy forward. Gives us more downforce in the tail section of this thing. So I'm going to lift it up and then break it up with that side intake piece. So let me stop there for a minute here, guys. What do you think? It just keeps getting, yeah, I think it does too. I really appreciate it, Chip, because it got, again, let's go back to that original study. Sort of delay the point here. Yeah, this had some character to it, yeah, but at the same time, it just lacked a little bit what I referred to as that really good. Oh, so we out of range here with lighting. There you go. That's it. Look how there it is. I mean, all right. So it was straightforward. It has some character. Yeah, it met some of the requirements of the original origin study we were looking at, kind of bringing it all down in scale. The original is really plain, and it didn't have enough character to it. So if we look at that and placing it in side by side of this guy, man, what a difference that's going to make as far as impact goes. Now, I'm not resolving anything back here today. I really want to look at this area right here. That was a real problem area, and I think we've got it resolved with this line now, this body, this surface. Pardon me, let me tighten up on just a bit here. This surface is going to come along and really do its job. This inside, this upper shelf comes inside, rolls up, and begins to create itself, thins up, and opens up again, and gives us that swallow's tail, or that rear section back there. Really interesting. And I think being simple back here, with all the moving flaps and so forth and hard edges and being much more refined, I don't think we need stuff like this back there. There's enough activity now in this to draw the attention. So let's do this just for a second. Let's draw this in. Get that shadow to work in that area. Again, this little offset here. This is where it kind of comes along and does this. Kicks in. Does the same thing here. That's a little flat spot before that intake. If you look at some of the 488s and the C8s, so forth, there's a little bit of an escutcheon around the actual opening itself to keep things in balance and travel the air, keep it nice and smooth. As it inserts the engine intake area. So we've got a lot of strength in this thing now. Let's kind of tone it down a little bit more. I don't regret at all going back in and reworking this thing. I think there's a lot of character to it. When we started it, it's a good stab at it, but it just was missing. Some of those pieces we're referring to here, that strong drive line, that line right there really was a key to opening it all up. That rhythm to that rhythm, and again reversing it again in the upper. Just now look at that. And now that has some, pardon me for stating this, that has some presence to it. It just looks like it's meaner. It looks like it's more aggressive. Some of the things will resolve back here, yeah, but that, if I'm looking at that much right there, that has some real character to it, and it really solves that problem up on top where that cantilever was. Let's see, this side wing is approved, all right. Side, I'm glad you like that, Chip, because I think that's got some real magic to it. So let's kind of do this. What now does it look like in the what does it look like in an elevation? Let's see if I can get this thing to work. Pardon me as I move the pad a little bit here, gang. Let's kind of get this down. Just really rough sketches today. On part 2, taking advantage of where we were last Thursday. I mean, this thing now all of a sudden has a real rhythm to it. It's starting to really sing, and I think, and I'm looking at it from the point of view too, of not only this element, but coming into it as a speed form and getting an essence down for a 3D printed model. So much cleaner. We can take advantage of little things like this. I'm exaggerating this offset here, obviously, and the actual machine itself and the actual scale drawing, it won't be as prominent, but it'll give us a little bit of an edge on where this thing is going to take its it's going to take its real course of action here. I'm going to stop and see it just keeps getting better. A bit plain, not bad, just a bit meh. Yeah, the side wing is approved. Good deal. I'm really appreciate it. Input is very critical and helpful there, Chip, and yours as well, Doug. Hope all is hanging in there pretty nicely. So let's go back and do this. Let's get this gesture here. We're going to start with the front wheel. Come back and count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pack. Larger rear wheel. Some of the old days of Formula One. Now let's get that front piece in there. Let's get that sway line in place. That does this, drops in, comes up over the top, and then brakes again. Just enough sway in there to kind of get that. Now I'm going to give myself a height there. Draw through it, Chip, so you can see how low we can get this thing. There's my nose piece right there. It's going to come out to that. See that? Drawing through it. There's my canopy. Look how much lower that is. All of a sudden, it just takes on a whole different character to it. So that's the essence of this. When you go to a 3/4 rear view, that's going to lift up a little bit. So anyway, let's get this guy down. Now let's move this into place. It's this into that. A longer peak, split line, come through it. Pick that up now. Notice that line is compatible to that line, so and to that line. So now, oops, that should go back the other way. Pardon me. It does that. There we are. That kicks it better. That to that. So now we've got that line, and then rhythm here. It's there, and it's going to go there. Now it's going to drop in and give us that front pant. I mean, look how that just all of a sudden just falls together ever so slightly nice. Look at that. Much guttier. Everything's leaning a lot more to the front effort. A lot of the weight or the power seems to be really happening at the back. As an F1 experimental with the 6 wheels design, something. Yeah, they did. That was Jackie Stewart and Francois Sever 6 wheels. What was it? The Elf Special, the 6 wheel. It was a really neat little machine. Yes, they did do that. So there we go. Let's go back in again. Now let's use that line. Let's come back off of this thing. What we did, we're going to pick up that line right there. That comes off of that split, drops in, gives us a tail line. Comes back in again, opens up the vacuole here. Now, that line is going to pick up the same character as the tail line. So that to that. Which now does this, it drops just a bit, picks up that line again, comes out in shoulder, just a touch. That piece down here begins to trail back a bit. Give me that. And again, let's put a little more lean in this thing here. That's just pretty static. There it is. There we are. Minimize that offset just a bit more. Now let's put that carryover G12 process in place. Now this undercarriage here, there's my capsule right there. That's the passenger. That's the driver's information right there. That's what that cell is going to look like. Chip. This thing's going to float in there, as opposed to being a part of the body itself. It'll still attach with those canards out front, like we're showing in the other views, but it has a lot more character to it in terms of referring to this really neat lean and getting it all put together. So let's kind of get these guys. Let's do this. Let's drop this back just a bit more. Let's kind of taper this down. That helps. Up, over, drive through. Let's get that insert piece in there. And take advantage of that section change again. It's going to come back with the top. Let's pick up that where that split line. These are going to be moving active arrow flaps back here. So we're going to do that. That's going to go active arrow. This move up at speed. Then we'll pick up the same process here. By drawing through that thing, Chip, I think it's going to help us see where we are here. I'm going to reverse the angle of the windscreen. I like that a little bit better. Maybe it's got a little bit more character to it. Let's drive that through. There's the buckle. There's the end cap. There's a secondary little window that we're going to throw in there. Just going to tint that in. By the way, by confession here, last Thursday, I really felt like, boy, I really did not do a service to that stream at all. It did not make sense. I was looking for answers instead of kind of exploring certain things the right way. And instead of analyzing what we're after, I just kind of put together some statements in terms of, well, it was okay, but it ended up to be a good learning lesson for me to be much more succinct about what you're trying to accomplish here and get the job done and to really move into it here. So what do you think, gang? There's an elevation study. I mean, look at the difference in the gesture of that thing. Lighter, faster, a lot leaner looking. So let's do this. Everything I tone in dark, it's going to be open airspace. This is now going to be, that's open. Underbody, just a little lighter tint here. That's where the driver's cockpit, that's the cell's going to be right there. I mean, look at the character in that thing, man. All of a sudden, it really, let's see, secondary windows is mandatory for those drive-through. Just mustard, ketchup, and light on the lettuce, right? Got it, Chip. Sounds good, man. All right, here we go. Let's go back in and pick up the center line of this guy. Let's kind of get where that's going to go. Let's put that little disc removal plate. There it is. This whole front assembly comes off. Let's kind of put this in a little bit of tint. Let's put a little bit of tint in this guy. It just shows a little bit of shadow underneath that area there. Let's get this guy to tint in a little bit more. Dark to light. Let's fade this in just a touch more. Let that a scotch into read. And then really put the power in this thing here, man, and just really crank on this beauty here to really kind of jive this thing up. Intake. Down the ground shadow. Wheel. Drive line. Entry egress cockpit, which we'll study a little bit further once we get a little further into the process here of refining this guy. Now, there you go. I mean, that has, what do you think, gang? Look at the gesture there as it was opposed to, hey, American Blade. ×3, 3 and R. Hey, good to have you. Chip, oh, hello. Hey, it's Horton. How are you? Good to have you on board, Horton. Thank you. How are you doing? He loves. Amazing. No, not quite. I really hadn't had a chance to communicate with you recently here. AmeroBlade, hey, thank you very much for joining here. I hope you're having fun looking at this thing. And Horton, I haven't had a chance to chat with you in a long time. Congratulations. I understand you're expecting another child. That'll be kind of cool. Oh, hey, thank you very much. AmeroBlade is now following. Thank you very much. AmeroBlade, excellent. Thank you so much for joining forces here. Thornburg, 84, thank you very much. Good to have you on board as well, gang. So I hope you haven't missed much of the presentation here, but if so, wow, Moonman, 90, wow, unbelievable. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Woohoo, follow. Unbelievable. So again, back to Horton, it's just been so, AmeroBlade, 2 accounts, holy cow. Really interesting to go back and hear from you, Horton. I'm glad all is well with you. And please forgive me for the silence at this end. I realized that over the holidays, things kind of shut down. I just started streaming last week, and I understand you're expecting another child. Congratulations. That's going to be exciting. Maybe I'll get a chance to do another monster, asteroid-eating monster for your new son or daughter. That'll be cool. So thank you very much. I've been trying to tune in to your shows and during the afternoons, but I don't have a real key into it all. Things are crazy here. Boy, I tell you, it really is. It's nuts. So nonetheless, thank you so much, folks, for joining in here. And this is kind of the culmination of getting into this whole idea of refining this G12 process. Let me show you where we started. This is where we started. Now look at the difference in character here. I don't know if you can see it or not, but let's kind of push this aside a little bit and kind of get this in a little bit of the light. This is where we were last year. I mean, that's okay, but it had a blandness about it. Yeah, we kind of, the goal here, for example, let me kind of extrapolate just a little bit here. The goal here was to kind of take the Origin D12. It had a GT version, but it didn't look like a racing machine. It looked like more of an overlander, so that's fine. No disrespect to those guys at all. So we took that package and began to drop some of the lines. We kept the width, lowered it considerably, kept the same shark nose front end on this thing, and just kind of simplified it front to rear to become more of a GT series machine. So once that was established, we went back in. And for those of you just joining in, that's kind of a quick review where the sketches are here. And with those of you joining right back in here, we went from that hands-on study into a rear three-quarter study. That started to look interesting, but it didn't have the same. This was a real enigma here. The real plot along the entire storyline is simply this. We had a good form going, and from there forward, looked pretty interesting. Now, all of a sudden, back in 3, we're having some real conflict getting that intake to work, the intake and the ground effect systems to work. So we started there with a three-quarter. Went to this one as a three-quarter, a little bit more blade-like, but it still had that realness over this very long, high-arched blister over the rear wheels, and it just a very difficult surface in here to kind of translate into. So last week I went in and did a series of little thumbnail sketches. What do we do if to resolve that whole rear three-quarter area? There's some interesting pencil sketches here. Just overall character on the front remained the same, but we noticed, for example, we opened this up just a bit more and then dropped that intake over the top. Still didn't resolve this whole platform area on the front three-quarters. Same with this. This is more of an attempt to get that intake to lift up. It just looked like it was forced, and the proportions were just not good at all. So we went from that sketch into this series here, where all of a sudden things started to move a little bit. This was it. Now notice the most unique thing about this sketch was this. In putting all these pieces together, we noticed the difference between the location of the cabin here, the survival cell, how it's pushed rearward. This one, we decided, let's push it all forward a little bit. So we moved the gesture forward. Now, this got a little bit better, but it still did not make sense because that surface was still too bland, and I mean, especially the rear three-quarter didn't resolve that same location there. So from that, where am I here? From that, we went into, for example, there was one pencil sketch here. If I put it down somewhere in here in the stack. Not really. Just going to kind of bypass it here. So that's where we were, those pieces. And then we went back from there and said, oh, well, let's do some histrionics here. Let's go back and look at what this might feel like. The last Thursday stream, I ended up with a sketch like this. And it was there, but it still had that same problem in the rear three-quarter. It really disturbed me. I thought, man, we got to get this thing resolved here. So went back in and looked at a series of variations on the theme. I started here, for example. Let's go backwards here, pardon me. Started here, looking at just very simple little sketches in terms of, let's do some of the, notice, there was the first pass we did after that stream on Thursday. Still looked very blocky, very high lift, a lot of plan view change. It didn't really look like it was as sweet or as streamlined as it should be. Now we've got this going on here, and now this offset might be a good generation phase too, but notice what began to happen here. Started to see the canopy becoming separate and floating. So really kind of interesting, and then really put a long tail on it for ground effects and the like. Then we went to this, from that series to that sketch. Notice how the canopy changed a little bit now. It just really started to move together with a lot of interesting feedback in terms of, we dropped the canopy, floated the upper, and then really kind of put that strong design line in place. Then went from that to that sketch, we started to move again. Notice that whole cantilevered upper, really interesting setup of circumstances there. Then we went to that sketch, front three-quarter, and again the elevation, to just kind of see what happens with that intake piece. And then the last one we did was this. And I think that's where I'm playing off of this guy here. This sketch was a real parent sketch of getting into this guy right here. So I think we've got a good resolve with this overall study here in terms of how to resolve that intake area, still make the machine lean, and have this whole cantilevered upper piece. And I think this view really kind of shows us what happens to the surface here. Let's kind of frame this in a little bit to give a little bit of a backdrop in this guy. Let's bring these two together. Just a little bit of a box frame to deal with here. And there it is there, and we're just going to let that fly. So what we're looking at here is to let this thing come together by doing the following. This is probably what I just got to illustrate a little bit of a backdrop to separate surfaces from backdrop. Let's do this. A nice simple rhythm. What I'm trying to do is get this thing prepped up so we can start doing some really neat looking, very good final renderings from the rear three-quarter and the front three-quarter. Let's kind of let that stream off just a little bit here, just a little more excitement. There it is. Let's get this shadow to working through. Let's drop this back just a bit more. Pardon me as I move the pad around a little bit here, sorry. So that kind of gives us a really good insight as to where we're going with this thing now. And I think, oops, pardon me, let me just drop this back just a touch. I just think that all of a sudden it starts to come together here. I really love the evolution. Yeah, thank you very much, Horton. I appreciate that. I think the evolution and the resolve is so much better now. I think we've got something we can make a statement on. As I said at the beginning of the stream, too, the reason for going back into this, Horton, and the rest of those of you who are very kind to hang on here. Hey, Captain Nemo, how are you? Good to have you on board again. How have you been? Long time no hear from. You doing well? Hopefully that's all worked out. The holiday season, I mean, you're very busy over the holiday season. Boy, I'm really glad to have you back on board, Nemo. You've been missed. But again, looking back at that conversation here, everybody, for everybody's benefit, the reason I went back in and revisited this thing, tired, how are you? Tired. Seems a daily rhythm change. Yeah, I can understand that fully. Hey, so the reason for going back in and revisiting this thing was, yeah, we had a good start, but I think the real idea was to get into a process where we're going to have our own brand with this thing. We're going to start developing a line of products off of this G2. We're going to rename it. It's going to come under the umbrella of Dr. Contrast and IP Forge Systems and start to work with this guy. The reason I want to get a really good presence on some sketch renderings here of the overall flavor is some really good final presentation, full color illustrations to put on our store for sale. We're also going to go to a 3D model printed model to do a really good, simple speed form. So I'm going to take whatever happens here, for example, really refine it down to a very simple speed form. And hopefully, during tomorrow's stream, I'll start doing some final rendering work on the front and rear three-quarter of this guy. And then maybe on Thursday's stream, start opening up how to develop a speed form by using empathic sketches. So we're really going to put together a story here as to how the whole process is going to unfold. And in the meantime, I'm going to look for a really good, wicked name for this thing to kind of fall into, and then begin to develop a product line out of this thing. So, hey, by the way, Nemo, you haven't seen most of the process here. What do you think of this variation here on the G12? Are we getting closer to something that's got a little bit more zip to it, or do you think it's a little bit tired? Your call. Really appreciate your input, as everybody's been really terrific here in terms of putting some really commentary together. Very helpful. And man, I tell you, while I'm waiting for the response from Nemo, yeah, I appreciate it, Captain Nemo. I think it's a lot more energetic. It's got some real personality to it now. Now it looks like it has some real fight. There's some personality and some character, but it still maintains the overall intent of that very G12 system. You were instrumental in helping with us last year. And by the way, too, Horton, I can't thank you enough for joining in. It's so nice to hear from you again, and I'm really glad you're well. But I missed getting into the, I'd have to find out where your schedule is so I can kind of tune in. Last time I tried to tune in, I couldn't do it because I wasn't, I guess I wasn't permitted to do so. I don't know why, but anyway, I couldn't chat back and forth with you to wish you all the very best during the holiday season. So yeah, I think we're making some real good progress here, gang. So let's do this. The plan for now is, now that I've gone through the evolution of this thing and taken the stance of saying, all right, let's rework this guy. Now we've got a character and personality. Now my task for tomorrow is to take this sketch, turn it around, do some nice elevations, get a front three-quarter that looks like it matches the rear three-quarter, and do some more refinement back in here, obviously. And then get it ready to go for some full color stuff. Then we'll revisit with the full color and some illustration work in the meantime. So again, so grateful for everybody to join in today. It's been a lot of fun. It's good to have Nemo back on board, and Horton, and those of you who have just joined or followed, chose to follow me. I sincerely thank you. I hope it's been entertaining for you as much as it is for me to work with you all out there in the audience. I just want to build my repertoire. I want to build my following to become just a drop-dead presence on. I've got a lot to learn, but I want to be a real force and a presence on this stream system on Twitch, because I think there's a real need for drawing systems out there. And by the way, I think just a quick announcement, hopefully sometime either at the end of the month or probably in the first week of February, I'm going to start moving into a lesson plan for a second tier intermediate series on 5 or 6 lessons on really simple learning cycles on how to develop an automobile. For example, maybe it's 6 lessons on maybe 10 minutes each on proportion, line weight, scale, illustration. So I'm starting to add to my website. For those of you who have just tuned in, please feel free to visit my website at drcontrast.com. You'll find some things there on just basic drawing skills. It's an entry-level program. It discusses perspective and light source and volumetrics and all the basics that we kind of deal with here in this system. By the way, this sketch today was all built on those principles we put on our website. So again, the website is called drcontrast.com. If you have any comments or questions you want to ask of me, feel free to get in touch with me at my email address at jim@drcontrast.com. I'm more than happy to respond. I'd love to have the feedback. Where do you want us to take this thing? What would you like to see done? There's so much involved in it. I just want to make sure I have really good rapport with my audience here. So for those of you, again, who joined today, boy, I can't thank you enough. It means an awful lot to me, and I don't want to disappoint you as far as performance goes. And Doug, thank you. It's always a treat to have you on board. Horton, Nemo, Chip, the new people that have followed. I've lost sight of where you are on the list here, but again, to those of you who have followed, thank you very, very much. And I will say this, too. I don't want to be self-serving and wrapping it up here. If you enjoy what you're seeing here, please pass along to your friends or associates that I'm on Twitch. I'll be going live Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. There might be some time changes here, but Tuesday it's 2:30 to 3:30. Wednesday 4 to 4:30 to 5. 4 to 5, pardon me. And then on Thursday again, 2:30 to 3:30. We might be doing some weekend stuff. We're looking at a schedule change and getting over an audience, but please pass along the word. If you like what you see, great. And by the way, while I'm at it, very interesting commentary as well. If I've done something well and I've said something correctly, tell me. If I've done something wrong or disagreement with me, tell me. I want to make sure we communicate well with you all out there. that are really taking the time to be with me. This has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it immensely. You're great people to work with, and I respect you enormously. So thank you again for taking the time. I always close with this, too, because I think it's part of the whole battle cry of Dr. Contrast, and it simply is this. Never forget to remember to dare to be great, because you are. It's just been a real joy to have you on board today, gang. Thanks so much. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 4 o'clock. All the very best, and go get them. Thanks, Chip, for the great input. Nemo, good to have you back on board. Horton, I love you. Nice to have you on board. I'm glad you're doing well, and let's stay in touch, all right? And to everybody else, please, Aeroblade, beautiful. Thank you so much, and the others who have joined us today. Really means a lot to me. So all the very best. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Go get them. Thank you. Bye-bye.